Hi, my name is Candace Metcalf, Applied Sociology graduate student at Sam Houston State University. I am very interested in police militarization as a source of inequality, since it has recently sparked public discussion over the use of police brutality, including the use of military tactics and military-grade equipment, in the process of recent protest. My interest in this topic is related to my community as a source of inequality and police militarization. It is not unique to my community only, it is taking hold across the country, as there has been a paradigm shift in police action since September 11, 2001, with the framework for the war on terrorism. There are two models in criminal justice that I have come to know in studying this topic. There is a criminal justice model for police, and there is a war model for police. When they are fused together, you get militarization of police. My main focus is on inequality of the force used in protest, militarization response, policing different groups and police legitimacy, and police as a structural stratification reinforcement. At first, as an indicator, I really want to focus on police around Chicago and my community and the distribution of military weapons by county. I have reviewed a lot of information related about protest, including news articles and peer-reviewed articles. This topic is very complex and multifaceted. However, I decided to use existing data of military weapons given to police on a county level and compare it with socioeconomic demographics to see if there is a correlation between poverty, crime, race, and then my research question I use existing data from peer-reviewed articles is, what factors do police deem threatening that deem specific responses in protests specifically for different demographics? This is an extremely interesting topic, but more than interesting, it is important to learn the actions taking place in a protest setting. First, to know what actions will be taken by police under what circumstances, to identify if they are using military-grade interactions with protesters, actions based on what kind of protesters and what kind of protest, and more importantly, do we really need this kind of police action to manage protest, and ultimately to find out if this is a source of inequality or a mechanism of stratification or a form of strata reinforcements. Hi, my name is Candace Metcalf, Applied Sociology graduate student at Sam Houston State University. I am very interested in police militarization as a source of inequality since it has recently sparked public discussion over the use of police brutality, including the use of military tactics and military-grade equipment in the process of recent protest. My interest in this topic is related to my community as a source of inequality and police militarization. It is not unique to my community only, it is taking hold across the country, as there has been a paradigm shift in police since September 11, 2001, with the framework for the war on terrorism. There are two models that I have come to know in studying this topic. There is a criminal justice model for police, and there is a war model for police. When you fuse them together, you get militarization of police. My main focus is on inequality of the force used in protest, militarization response, policing different groups, and police as a structural stratification reinforcement. As an indicator, I really want to focus on police around Chicago and my community and the distribution of military weapons by county. I have reviewed a lot of information related about protest, including news articles and peer-reviewed articles. This topic is very complex and multifaceted. However, I decided to use existing data of military weapons given to police on a county level, compare it with socioeconomic demographics to see if there is a correlation between poverty, crime, and race. Then my research question, I use existing data from peer-reviewed articles, and my question is, what factors do police deem threatening that deem specific responses in protest specifically for different demographics? This is an extremely interesting topic, but more than interesting, it is important to learn the actions taking place in a protest. First, to know what actions will be taken by police under what circumstances, to identify if they are using military-grade interactions with protesters, actions based on what kind of protest, and actions based on what kind of protesters. More importantly, do we really need this type of police action to manage protest? And ultimately, to find out if this is a source of inequality and or a mechanism of stratification or a form of strata reinforcements. On this slide, you see the idea behind militarization model. I have not found very much information on this topic. Many articles I have read talk about two models for police, the criminal justice model and the war model. The idea that I hear in public discussion of militarization of police is that police resemble soldiers in their actions, looks, or behaviors. Here I have listed models of militarization. I created these models to pose a question to ask, what is militarization of police? Is it a process as the model going from one side to the other? Are police moving towards the criminal justice model, to the militarization model, and then to the war model? Is this the idea? Or is it a mechanical mechanism where the criminal justice model, police model, or war model interact? Or is it a paradigm shift where you see the criminal justice model, war model, and militarization model overlapping? As we think about what militarization is, let me leave you with this notion of mission creep, a term I have come to understand studying nation building. It is a gradual shift in objectives during the course of a military campaign, often resulting in an unplanned long-term commitment. I consider this to be the root of police militarization, as police have shifted in actions and behaviors since 9/11 from the traditional criminal justice model police force to a fusion model, which is militarization since police are working under different umbrellas in order to combat terrorism and still be able to perform their roles as police officers. Okay, so here again on this slide, I put the idea in visual terms. We have our police officer in the center. They're giving their salutes. And on the right-hand slide, we have the peace officer. Looks friendly and engaging. He would be somebody who does civilian police work. And on the left, we have the warrior cop. And some of the texts that I have read do talk about a shift from police working as police officers to warrior cops. And the next slide, I will continue. Below are images selected of warrior cops. Let your imagination work here. Are these soldiers or are they cops? And here is police on segways in a brigade formation with guns drawn, an armored vehicle, and a SWAT team in the far right picture. SWAT teams are considered paramilitaries inside of the police. They are trained in counterterrorism and traditionally trained in raids, bombs threats, or hostage situations. However, they are used most often to perform regular police duties such as serving warrants or making warrants arrests or raiding a home thought to sell drugs. By the way, all of the majority of these activities are done towards citizens who are believed to be involved in non-violent crimes. Below, I provide more information with a link on the rise of the warrior cop from the Cato Institution. Another great indicator for police militarization is SWAT teams, and looking at how SWAT teams are used, because if they are used improperly, they are also a mechanism of inequality. Here's a study that shows a sample of how many police units increasingly use SWAT teams to conduct regular police business that most often is geared towards nonviolent crimes. And I quote, according to two surveys conducted by the criminologist Peter Kraska of Eastern Kentucky University, just 13% of towns between 25,000 and 50,000 people had a SWAT team in 1983. By 2005, the figure was up by 80%. Okay, so now for my topic, which is police militarization and protest. And my question was, what factors do police deem threatening that deem specific responses in protest specifically for different demographics? So we talked a little bit about the police militarization model and its kind of vagueness. It's not clearly defined what it is, or really we have an idea what it is, but I mean, what is it? And also the idea of the warrior cop and the police officer, the peace officer, and the use of paramilitary and like RTVs or armored vehicles in the police force, and the use of the paramilitary or SWAT teams in police. So, moving on to our research question, what factors do police deem threatening that deem specific responses in protest, specifically for different demographics? Police and protest. I did review a couple of peer-reviewed articles pertaining protest that are content analyst oriented, since it's hard to do research during protest. A lot of times researchers, they look at images and media and articles, and they analyze them pertaining protest and different ideas from the protest. So this one is Protesting While Black. It is a study that's done from 1960 to 1990 by Davenport, Soule, and Armstrong. It was published in 2011. And this is the differential policing of American activism. They specifically look at race and inequality in protest to see how it plays out. And so, since this is a very long, ongoing study, it does help to kind of give some consistency and more substance to the results versus some of the later peer-reviewed articles that I talk about. Here, police this is kind of, this paper from 1960 to 1990, the study kind of serves as a pre-war on terror model of policing protest, and which is very significant to see how police treated people before they did the idea of militarization or the fusion, a policy of where police are training for counterterrorism and working as police officers at the same time, and before police forces started receiving military-grade equipment. So, moving on, there is larger protest increases likelihood of police presence. That was a very big indicator for police to show up at a protest. Counter-protest created a setting for conflict. When there was two group of protesters that were they're protesting conflicting things, that was an increase for having conflict at a protest, which of the cases that were studied, only 6% of all the protests from 1960 to 1990 had a counter-protest. And 16% of all cases studied had a confrontational had confrontational protesters, where protesters were confrontational with police. and 21% had some form of violence. And violence in protests could be anything from pushing, shoving, shouting, threatening, destroying property, throwing, to worse things. And most of the time, they're the general pushing, shoving, destroying of property, or throwing things. And 10% had property damage. So these are very big ideas that would bring a police force to a protest, because they would want to manage the crime and try to reduce any violence or anything that would end up with looting or destruction of property, or deviant characters that might cause trouble inside of protest. The more complex actions that were taken by protesters, or like the increased number of different actions taken by protesters, increased aggression of police. The number one factor that contributed to police aggression in protest was the context of the protest and its political nature. If protesters are protesting against the government or government policy directly or indirectly, this would cause increased aggression on the police actions. Okay, so Davenport et al. And the study of protesting while black. The study results of the content analysis shows that out of 15,000 protesters, 38,000 had African Americans present. Police were present 75% of the time when there was an African American present, or African Americans. Police were present 25% of the time when it was only white protest. The result finding shows that African American protesters and white American protesters are treated differently, and African American protests are more heavily policed, and African American protests are more subject to police actions more often than white protesters, and police actions would involve like arrest and control mechanisms within protest. The next study that I found is actually, this is just articles in different papers talking about this project. This is done by a sociologist. His name is Nick Adams. He started this idea called the Deciding Force, an organization funded by the National Science Foundation and the University of Berkeley. And he is conducting research, and he has a team of researchers conducting research. And the purpose of the organization is to study conflict between protesters and police in order to prevent violent conflicts between protesters and police. And I did provide a video, a YouTube video there for you, where you can see him talk about his organization. But basically, the articles that have come out, they have stated that from their research, they have identified that when police are coming to protest and they are aggressive in nature, or they look more aggressive, that it increases the likelihood of confrontation leading to conflict between police and protesters. So now I'm going to look at existing data that I have found online. It is presented in in a news article in an interactive map, and this program is from the Pentagon Department of Defense Program 1033, and supplying weapons to law enforcement agencies for free. And the program's been active since 1990. So the data that I am going to share with you follows. I compared different county level weapons given to areas of Chicago to that of socio-demographics to see if there is kind of a pattern or if there's some sense of inequality. So this is my introduction, and we'll see the rest on the next slide. Okay, so here is the data that I got together. Socioeconomic demographics for different counties in Chicago, along with the county level weapons program. And so here I kind of tabulated a list for each county, and I tried to make some graphs for this. I wasn't very successful, but I did analyze the information, so I will share it with you next. Um, in Cook County, they have a very large population of minorities. They have 24.8% African Americans and 24% Hispanics. They also had a large poverty rate, and of course, Cook County is very large. There's millions of people who live in Cook County, and from that population, it's like highly dense, more concentrated in the population of poverty compared to the other counties within Chicago. So on my next slide, you can review this information, but on my next slide, I will talk about the details of my analysis. Okay, so here I have a picture for you so you can visualize Chicago. This is my beautiful city where I live, and I live down here in the southwest side, and it's in one of these blue areas. And you can see like there's just a line pretty much going up, and one half of Chicago is Cook County, and the other half is Lake County. So in Cook County, you can see that it's densely populated with African Americans and also with Hispanics, compared to the north side, which is predominantly other than African American or Hispanic. I didn't include the other demographics um, other than African American and Hispanics for this, just to show the major difference. Anyway, so you can see visually the concentration from the south to the north. Okay, so this is my analysis. Of the 7 counties I looked at, I decided just to look at the immediate counties, which is Cook County, Lake County, and DuPage County. One is the south, the north, and the west. And the north and the south of Chicago is kind of divided in the middle, and later on I have a map where you can kind of see the demographic divide in Chicago. So here I have Cook County, which is the south, and in Cook County, the population of African American and Hispanics represent 48.8% of Cook County. The total population of the demographic for African Americans and Hispanics, which is only 48.8% of the total population, is 2,557,461. The program gave 1,202 assault rifles. So I did some interesting math here. I divided the population, the total population of the African American and Hispanic uh, populace to the amount of assault rifles given in the program. So there is one assault rifle for every 2,127 African American and Hispanics in this population. And the poverty rate is 18, the highest in Chicago. For Lake County, which is the north side of Chicago, the population of African American and Hispanics represent 26.9% of Lake County. The total population of this demographic is 189,112. So you see there is a very big difference in the total population from the south side to the north side, just for African Americans and Hispanics. The program gave 182 assault rifles. So for every one, for every one assault rifle, there was one assault rifle for every 1,039 persons in this demographic. And again, this demographic is only the African American and Hispanic population. And the poverty rate in the north side is 9.4. In DuPage County, which is the west side of Chicago, it is a very prestigious area and densely populated with wealth. The African American and Hispanic population represents 17.9% of the entire county. The total population of the demographic, 166,850. So you see there's even less African American and Hispanics living in this area. This program gave 197 assault rifles to DuPage County, and there is one assault rifle for every 846 person in this demographic. The demographic is, of course, the African American and Hispanic population, and the poverty rate here is 7.3. And the reason why I did it like this is I wanted to see the ratio to this population to that of the assault rifles. I just thought it would be an interesting analysis to see how it correlated. And I don't know, I find this a very interesting view of the assault rifles given in this program. Okay, so interesting data, very interesting correlations, and of course, this is a topic that is not studied, and I am looking at very recent new information that has been published online and from the weapons program and correlating it with socio-demographic information. Of course, I wanted to see if there is some kind of correlation of inequality going on with the distribution of weapons in the militarization of police and with the police action and protest. And so, of course, that would be a really good indicator to know that what we have seen in the past few months or in the past few years with police coming to protest and the militarization, one way to know if it's going to happen in the future is to know if they have the weapons to do that. And so that's a pretty good indicator of future actions in protest. Does crime rate justify military weapons? Okay, so I presented some information about militarization and militarization model and police in protest and militarization and protest. Now, we have to ask this question, really, going forward, and does crime rate justify military weapons? Most of the crimes that police use SWAT teams or paramilitary type teams to deliver warrants are for nonviolent crimes and for nonviolent crime raids, such as the war on drugs. So it's just a very interesting idea and question that we can throw out there. But upon my analysis, it shows that there is a divide of weapons and weapons distribution along the same lines as wealth and socio-demographics of Chicago. Of course, the north side, the Lake County demographic, received the majority of high-priced equipment with vehicles and helicopters, and whenever correlating like the ratio to the African American Hispanic demographic to the weapons, there is a higher uh, rate given to these demographics. And whereas Cook County, predominantly the poor, largely African American and Hispanic areas, received the majority of riot gear. So we just have to ask ourselves, why would the rich area get all of the uh, high priced military grade equipment, such as vehicles, and the poor area get mostly riot gear? It's a very interesting question, and for me, uh, I would say that it does show kind of um, the economic disparities between the two counties and the way that they are arranged. Moving forward with research, how I feel this topic could be researched more thoroughly is I've already identified a few indicators for measuring police militarization, and I've kind of showed a system where we can uh, correlate the information with socioeconomic demographics with real information that we have already collected across the country. Um, as far as police militarization, militarization is something that is an abstract idea. We can see it, we can kind of measure behavior. However, my two indicators that I listed so far for the evidence that I've shown is past research done on protest, one. Two is the indicators of SWAT teams and their use across the country, how they are used in the police forces, how often are they targeting non-violent crimes or used in operations or duties involving non-violent crimes. Four, I believe that studies of police attitudes should be done, maybe qualitative studies where researchers can go in and do ethnographic research with police to measure their attitudes and also learn more about the actions and the behaviors and the symbols that people find within the police forces to kind of either identify police militarization or attitudes towards civilians from police who are militarized, and then also qualitative research on behalf of citizens who live in areas where they have interacted with police who are militarized, such as Ferguson. Also, to develop an index to measure police militarization within police forces. I know that it's kind of an abstract ideology, so to measure the phenomenon of militarization or an understanding of it, I think an index or a list of questions that can be rated by the Thurston scale, maybe that might be a really good method for a longitudinal study on police attitudes and police behaviors and militarization. And as far as research involving surveys, I think that kind of information would be very iffy, measuring militarization, but it could be utilized in understanding attitudes or opinions. And I think that more contextual qualitative research methods is probably the best way to go about measuring, other than looking for the indicators like I shown military weapons given to police, and also an index and measuring SWAT team use across the country. Now, I have also included a video here in memory of Michael Brown and the discussion he started. It is very emotional if you listen to it. It is a black man speaking about the experience he had in the protest, and he is relating to the protest with his life experience. It is very emotional and very heartbreaking. If you want to watch it, it is very insightful, and it helps you understand the experience of the black man in this country. And I feel like this is a good point of reference for understanding this type of inequality in the criminal justice system. African American males are disproportionately represented in the population, and I cannot speak on behalf of the experience of somebody who's been involved with police or police militarization on a first-hand account other than what I have seen in the media. However, I am a minority, and I have experienced discrimination and oppression and systems of inequality that have limited my social mobility in life and that have hurt me in other social arenas. However, I have never faced the life experiences of a black male in this country. So for me, this research is very important. I feel like the most vulnerable among us in the system of inequality deserves a voice and deserves a chance to be heard. And so I did include a video so that people could hear what it's like to be a black male in America. Thank you.